Hi, everyone. I hope you're well, and I hope that this past summer provided some opportunity for you for rest and restoration, and that this school year is starting with some renewed sense of hopefulness. Although I would love for us to be gathered for this presentation, I am very grateful for the technology and the creativity that allows When Faith Meets Pedagogy to continue even in difficult times. I also want to say that I'm touched that you have welcomed me in this moment into your space, perhaps even your home. And I'm glad that we can be together apart, even if we can't be entirely together. I asked you to join me today for a reflection on the pandemic as a pregnant pause. Why that image? Why is that phrase helpful to us? What does it mean? I think it's important for us to recognize that the pandemic represented loss for each and every one of us of some kind. Perhaps it was a loss of the sense of control over our lives, a loss of peace. Some of us may have experienced financial loss, career loss, relationship loss, even the loss of loved ones. We had to put on hold and possibly miss altogether celebrations of joy and gatherings of grief. We've all been apart from those that we loved and those who needed us and those whom we needed desperately. As vaccines have allowed us to emerge, however slowly, from this pandemic, I think it's important that we ask ourselves, what have we learned? How do we move forward? Who have we become? Pandemic as pregnant pause is a helpful image, I think, as we reflect on those very questions. When I searched for the definition of pregnant pause, I came across two that I thought helped our reflection today. And the first said this: pregnant pause is a silence full of potential. It is a silence that is full of potential. Of course, the last year was not entirely silent by any means. I mean, there was the nonstop reminder pings of online meetings, the friendly and sometimes frustrated reminders, you're on mute. There was recorded overhead announcements everywhere we shopped, reminding us to stay 6 feet apart from one another. And even the noisiness of our own homes. I know in my own home, we had manufacturing happening in the back room of the house. Grade 11 was taking place upstairs, and the work of the Institute for Catholic Education was trying to take up residence in my living room. But there was a kind of silence too. There was a silence in the Easter celebration that was a TV mass. There was a silence in the Christmas dinner where we only gathered with our immediate family and not all the cousins and aunts and uncles and grandparents. There was a silence in the 90th birthday for Grandpa, my father, that was celebrated in the briefest of Zoom calls. But listen again, because pregnant pause isn't just silence. It's a silence that is full of potential. And the second definition I found, I thought really helped get at that idea of what does that mean, full of potential? It said a pregnant pause holds a special meaning, which is not obvious, but which everyone is aware of. So that fullness of potential is a meaning. There's a special meaning there. And we know there's a meaning there. Everyone's aware of it, but we're not entirely sure what it is. I want you to think about pregnant pause in contrast to, say, dramatic pause that our reality TV shows have really so perfected. Think about those moments that our favorite TV shows try to create to intensify the drama we're feeling. Tyler, will you accept this rose? Dim the lights, America has voted. And the singer leaving the competition tonight is, of course, that's the moment when we cut to commercial. The idea of the dramatic pause is that it's supposed to be heightening our sense of the drama, increasing the weight of the importance of the response. But let's be clear, the response to those dramatic moments is a yes or a no. It's a this singer or a that singer. It's limited in its potential. The pandemic has not just been a dramatic pause in our lives, it's been a pregnant one. So I think it's important to think about what is coming to birth in you and I, personally and collectively, as families, as school communities, as parishes, even as a nation. Now, as a mother of 4 children myself, I know this about pregnant. Between pregnant and what comes to birth, there's always labor. There's always some work to do to get to that full potential being realized. So what I'm asking you today is to labor with me a little while as we think about what the special meaning is. What is the full potential of pregnant pause in terms of 4 concepts: person, place, promise, and purpose. Let's start with persons. I have 2 little ideas there to help us. The first is this: we have all had a common experience. We all lived through the pandemic. So it's a common experience, but it is not a shared experience. It was, by its very nature, isolated from one another. Each of us experienced it differently. As people of faith, we have a lot that draws us toward shared meaning. I want you to think, for example, of how you come to the Mass. Each of us drives up or walks up or bikes up to the parish on our own or with our small family group. We enter individually. We're seated in our own little space. And so we come to it as individuals with whatever the joys and challenges of that week have been. But the moment it begins, what happens? We rise together, facing the same direction, shoulder to shoulder. At the first song, we join our voices together. And throughout that Mass, we have shared experience. We confess together. We ask one another to pray for each other. We take the body of Christ together so that we can become the body of Christ once again out in the world. That's at the end of the Mass when we are dismissed, go glorifying the Lord by your life. We have literally remembered who we are, and we are sent out into the world in that shared experience of meaning. As a Catholic education community, our work needs to begin with the listening to one another, the sharing of the experiences, our losses, our questions, our hopes, so that we can find the shared meaning that gives new life to the experience. That's the first idea. And the second is this: every one of our students and their families has also had the common experience that has not yet been fully shared. They need their time and space as well to tell the story so they too can enter into the shared experience that reminds us of who we are and whose we are. Making meaning of our story in the light of faith has always been the labor of Catholic education. It has always been our work. If we can see the pandemic as pregnant pause, then we can labor together to bring about the birth of the new understanding. So that's a little thought about persons. Now, place. When we think of place, during the pandemic, we realized that some of the time, the pandemic forced us into places we did not want to be. Some of the time, the pandemic forced us to stay away from places we desperately wanted to be. Some of the time, it made place feel very lonely. The labor when we think about place is to come to realize, why was place so important to us? What is it about place that draws us so intensely? It can't be true that it's bricks and mortar and doors and windows and lockers and desks that constitute who we are. So why did we miss the place so much? I think it's important for us to hold an image of ourselves as threshold people. And what do I mean by that? You know, in the translation of the earlier Mass, we used to say, Christ has died, Christ is risen, Christ will come again. We live on the threshold of Christ has died and is risen behind us, and Christ will come again before us. We live in that in-between time and space. We act that out. We have a gesture, a ritual for that every time we enter our parish. With all that the secular world is to us behind us, as we approach the threshold of our parish, we pause and we dip our fingers into the holy water font we find there, and we mark ourselves with the sign of our faith. Why do we pause on the threshold? To remind us again, this is the faith in the name of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Spirit that has marked me, that has defined me, that has joined each one of us together by reason of our baptism. Now, there are no holy water fonts at the doorways of our schools and our school board buildings, but they represent important thresholds nonetheless. When we enter into those spaces, we have to recognize we are walking into a privileged place, a place where the good news of Jesus Christ can and is still being proclaimed, a place where the good news of building the kingdom of God, bringing justice, mercy, and love more into the world. As Jesus says, finding sight for the blind and setting the captives free. This is a meaningful threshold for us. It is important that we recognize that we have an opportunity to walk into what can be sacred ground. So the labor of this moment of pandemic as pregnant pause is doing the work of asking ourselves, how will we not take place for granted? How will we care for the place, show our reverence for the place and for those we meet there? So that's persons, place, and now promise. The beautiful letter from our bishops renewing the promise told us that the promise of Catholic education was that the true encounter with Jesus Christ can and does take place every day in our Catholic schools. We were just beginning to unpack the riches of that letter when the pandemic hit. We were so drawn to the themes of encounter and accompaniment that we find throughout renewing the promise, also throughout the teaching of Pope Francis. There was something very fundamental about those two concepts that drew us, because in some deep way, we know that's who we are when we are at our very best, when we are encountering and accompanying one another on the road, on the journey of faith, when we are attentive to the Lord who walks with us, when we are aware of his word opened up for us, when we are gathered at the sharing of the Eucharistic meal, and when we find ourselves so on fire, our hearts burning with love for the Lord, that we rush back to our communities, out into the world, to spread the good news, to be the good news. But the pandemic kept us away from one another. And so just at the moment when we were entering into this big reflection on encounter and accompaniment, we were taken away from one another. And yet I think we saw the labor already beginning in the pregnant pause, because I saw us trying to name how much we wanted to encounter and accompany one another, even though we were apart. I saw it in the hashtag together apart. That was the beginning of our work, trying to name the way that we would reimagine what encounter and accompaniment could look like no matter where we are. As we emerge from the pandemic, I think our labor, our ongoing work, is to ask ourselves, how can we encounter each and every one of our students so that we find all of them, the ones who are on roads that we recognize and the ones on roads we ourselves have not yet traveled. So we've thought person, place, and promise, and now we come to purpose. If the pandemic did anything, it caused us to question the purpose of everything. From the furnishings in our home to our possessions such as toilet paper and paper towel in our cupboards, it made us reconsider the purpose of our schedules, the daily activities that took up our home and work calendars. What was the purpose of sports? What was the purpose of having coffee with friends, the purpose of seeing a movie in a real movie theater? It, of course, caused us to rethink and reconsider and revalue the purpose of all our relationships, and certainly the relationships in our families, but also the relationships in our schools, the bonds in a classroom, the bonds in a staff room, the very important conversations that happen at the edges of conference rooms and boardrooms before the conversation at the table ever begins. We came to see the deep connection between all of us, and we saw that our choices were and are consequential to our neighbors, both locally and globally. We came to appreciate what it is to be stewards of all God's creation and the important choices we need to make about that. We saw in moments of light and heroic dedication in our healthcare workers, certainly, but also in our colleagues in education, what it is to find God's mercy and love still active even in the struggle. We saw ourselves as guardians of the hope that is a gift to us from God, and we watched over it so that we could see patience and kindness and goodness and even joy bloom in places that could easily have been seen as desolate. And finally, we recognized once again that the promise of Catholic education is precious. We need to carry it with care, just like the little ring bearers at our weddings who hold the treasure on their little satin pillows and walk with such great dignity and solemnity down the aisle. We need to hold the promise carefully because it is treasure to us. We are bearers of the promise. 2,000 years ago, St. Paul, wanting to give encouragement to his friends in the church in Corinth, spoke to them about the hope we hold that is rooted in the resurrection of Jesus Christ. And in his letter to the Corinthians, he said this: "Thanks be to God who gives us the victory through Jesus Christ. Therefore, my beloved, be steadfast, immovable, always excelling in the work of the Lord, because you know that in the Lord your labor is not in vain." My friends, let's hear those words spoken to us again. Give thanks to God, who gives us and has given us the victory through our Lord Jesus Christ. Therefore, my friends, in Catholic education, let us continue to be steadfast, always excelling in the work of the Lord, as we have excelled and can still excel, not in our own work only, but in the work of the Lord, because you and I know that in the Lord, our labor will never be in vain. What will come to birth through the labor of our reflecting is not certain. The pregnant pause is full of potential. It's full of possibility. It has been, in some ways, a collective holding of the breath, a very anxious holding of the breath, as we waited to see how it would end. As we exhale, we can be more aware, more appreciative, more intentional. If we can enter into the image of a pregnant pause, and if we are willing to labor together in our reflecting, then we will see what can come to birth through us for the better, even in the light of this time of struggle. May God bless all our labors. Thank you.